This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Hi, hello, and welcome to a very special RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. A little warm-up for the HSFF Hour, which is coming up in a couple hours. Because of the holiday, we couldn't do the show this week on Tuesday, so we're doing the show live tonight on Friday night. So glad to have you. Connect with me on X at Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network and the HSFF Hour as well. I want to remind you as we get things going here about the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge, which is going on right now. We're taking signups at myffpc.com. There's two different contests. It's the same format for both. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. You just choose the 12 players that you want for the entire postseason, and then you lock them in, and you watch them ride throughout the playoffs. Remember, double points for the big game at the end. You can win $500,000 if you want to enter for $200, or if you want to enter for $35, you still have a shot at $100,000. That's at myffpc.com. The only slant, you can only pick one player per team. If you want A.J. Brown, you can't have Jalen Hurts. If you want Puka Nacua, you can't have Matthew Stafford, that kind of thing. myffpc.com is where to go for that. You can also play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. That's going on right now for Week 18 as well. myffpc.com, same format. Can't double up on players on the same team. You can enter for as little as $35, win up to $200. That's Week 18 only. It's our last weekly challenge of the year. Take advantage of both of those at myffpc.com. I want to shout out right away, All 22 FF Triflex champion for the FFPC this year in one of the RotoViz leagues. There you go. So congratulations, All 22 FF, and thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We have a special treat. We nobody tunes in just to hear me talk and gas bag for 60 minutes. So we always try to bring in some of the best players in the world. And a guy who I've done a show with in the past is back tonight. He has won well over a dozen, probably closer to 24 high-stakes FFPC leagues this year. Speaking of the $1 million in the FFPC Main Event this year, he didn't win it, but he did finish top 20. We welcome him back onto these airwaves tonight. Please welcome on Mr. Gary Kuhr. Gary, welcome in, man. Happy New Year.
Hey, Eric. Happy New Year. How you doing?
Doing good. Very excited to have you on. I think that, coming up on this program tonight, Gary and I are going to talk about a lot of stuff with the playoffs, mostly stuff about next year and how 2024 ended up for you after Week 17. I did not follow the leaderboard specifically for everybody on there. I'm sure you were following it with that team that you had at the top. Were you ever close to the million? How high did you get in Week 17 to that seven-figure grand prize?
Yeah, Eric, I really never felt that close, unfortunately. I started Week 17 in 18th place, which in and of itself doesn't sound too bad. But when I saw how much of a gap I had to first place, I felt like maybe second or third was my ceiling. I really didn't think first at that point was my ceiling. I would have needed to put up like a 220 plus that last week. Now I put up 215 in Week 16. So not out of the question, but I didn't really think it was realistic to put a second score like that together, 2 weeks in a row. And I ended up putting up like a 175 that last week. Terry McLaurin got me a whopping 1.5 points. But I ended up missing first by almost 44 points. So even a really big game from him wasn't going to get me there. But I will share with you and I'm embarrassed to say this, but a lineup mistake I made in week 15, the very first week. I pulled somebody with 30 minutes to go before kickoff, and it ended up costing me a little over 22 points. And if I had just left that in my lineup, I would have been in the top 10 the whole way and would have finished fourth. So it was a $46,000 mistake, unfortunately.
What about do you want to share who it was? And
I will. And you can say all day, hindsight 2020, in week 17, if we had played Adam Thielen over Terry McLaurin, which I would have never done in a million years. I wanted the Daniels McLaurin stack, of course, the last week. But if I had done that, that would have been a 26.5 point difference, right there. So I'm not talking about that. I pulled Brian Thomas and put Adam Thielen in 30 minutes before I had my reasons behind why I did it. And when I, realized at the end of the day, the mistake, it just kind of ate me up for the next couple of weeks, but all good.
Now to your point regarding the Thielen over McLaurin thing, those are the ones I never sweat anyway. Like, if I never contemplate, I'm not going to be upset about it.
Didn't bother me one bit, but knowing I had the right play and then pulled it 30 minutes before, that's the killer.
Now, maybe in your defense, and I'm guessing here because I don't remember the exact timeline. Is this when Mac Jones was throwing to Brian Thomas for the first time?
Not the first time.
Okay.
So 2 games before is when Lawrence got hurt and Mac Jones finished the game. The week before, Mac Jones played the whole game and Thomas had like 8 for 80 something. So it was, 16 point. But they played the Jets in week 15 and Sauce Gardner was back that week. And I just thought that matchup, and I thought with Thielen with fresh legs, and he had 2 really nice games in a row, I just got cute with it, and I thought I was maybe playing somebody who wouldn't be in as many lineups, to try to differentiate myself a little bit. So, I mean, there was good rationale behind it, but at the end of the day, I just, I should have just stuck to my guns.
Do you feel like it's more difficult to submit lineups in the championship round, or do we just put more pressure on ourselves those final 3 weeks and they just become difficult because of that?
Yeah, I think it's the latter because you're trying to find a way to be different, than everybody else. And I know there was a story a couple of years ago where the Go Bills guys, I think it was the second year they won it. I don't remember what they did, but they played somebody pretty obscure the very first week of the sprint. And it hit for them big time. And, I've got things like that in the back of my head, when I'm trying to make these decisions. I think I just outsmarted myself, at the end of the day.
And okay, you say that, but if I'm remembering this correctly from the Go Bills guys, I believe it was Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight, that they put in last second over Zay Jones, it was over Zay Jones. And to me, that's like, I understand the rationale behind it. I also don't think like it was a Zay Jones was a slam dunk. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right. Like that's more now for you. I get why you're upset about it, but at the same time, like I still feel like one of the things that makes this so maddening is just, the funny shape of the football and this is a weird game, and you're talking about something that we draft for an entire season and it comes down to a week. Weird stuff happens. And I think that trusting your process and going by the same process all the time, to me, as a longtime fantasy player as you are, I think that's more important than getting it right. You know what I mean? Like you can get things right by wrong process, but if you're following the correct process, I feel like we just got to hang our hats on that, and then whatever happens.
100%. I'm definitely a process over results guy without question. And I agree in the long run, I think, you're going to be better off. But to be that close is tough.
There was, I'll share this story too on the HSFFO a few weeks back. One of the viewers asked a question about, should I play Jared Goff over Jaden Daniels. And I said, I'm a weak man. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play Jaden Daniels over Jared Goff. Yeah. And I actually, when I was setting lineups that Sunday, Gary, I noticed that I had in Jared Goff over Jaden Daniels. And then with about 10 minutes to go, I subbed him out. I put Daniels in over Goff. And, Daniels was great. He had like 26 points that week. But Goff had 46.
Right.
And those in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, ultimately, I think I finished like 30th, so it wouldn't have mattered. Yeah. But that would have moved me up like 20 spots that one week. So that was maddening. And then the other one, and this one I'm really, really ticked off about. In one of my private dynasty leagues I'm in, I was fighting for the playoffs in the last week of the season. And I'm putting up a good score. I'm talking to my son, and I'm like, why do I have Lamar Jackson? This is week 14. Why do I have Lamar Jackson in at quarterback? I had Brock Purdy on the bench. And I realized I left him in there. I never took him out. With the points that Purdy had that week, which was like 20-something, sure. I would have not only beaten my opponent, it would have given me 3 extra victory points. I would have made the playoffs with the final seed, and then I played out the season or the remainder of the season. I would have finished as the runner-up in that league had I just not subbed in. Yeah. Had I subbed in Purdy properly for Jackson. Now, the good part about it, silver lining, I ended up winning the non-playoff teams, the number 1 pick of the rookie draft next year.
Okay.
So silver lining, I guess. Yeah. We don't always get that. And quite frankly, I still would have been the runner-up. But it is what it is. We move on. Tom Smith, by the way, in the chat, longtime FFPC KFFSC player. I'm totally guilty of changing my lineup like 15 times during the week when I should have just left the first lineup in. I always say, think long, think wrong. But again, I think that as much as we are torn up about these decisions in the championship round, we always remember the ones that didn't work out. We don't always remember the ones that we actually made the right call by subbing somebody out, and then it works. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was your week 17. I noticed, and this really blew me away. The team that you had in the main event that finished 20th overall went crazy on rookies. You drafted Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Brian Thomas, Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Polk, Tyrone Tracy, Jalen McMillan, and Will Shipley.
Yeah.
And it seemed to work out. So I have to ask you, was this an outlier? Have you done something like this before? Did you do it on other teams this year? And how likely are you to employ this kind of strategy in 2025?
Yeah. Well, I absolutely had plans this year of drafting heavier rookies without question.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because I observed a lot of guys near the top of the sprint last year that had a lot of rookies in their lineup. Just in general, I thought it was a hole in my game that I wasn't going for that upside. JJ Zachariason is like my favorite industry analyst, and he always talks about the second half of a year for rookies, how they really ramp up and the game slows down, especially wide receivers. So I absolutely had that as a plan. But never in a million years did I go in thinking I would draft this many rookies on one team. It just played out that way. With the way people fell to me, and when I decided to reach for guys based on other people that were there. So if you would have told me I was going to draft that many rookies on any one team, I wouldn't have believed you. It just fell that way.
So next year you're still going to put a focus on rookies, just maybe not. This was an outlier. You're not going to draft.
I haven't started my rookie analysis yet. And last year was the first year that I really placed greater emphasis over the first month of the off season in really understanding rookies. My boss is a big dynasty guy, and he has kind of helped funnel good information my way. I don't get the sense that this year's rookie class is going to be as deep, especially at the wide receiver position. I could be completely wrong about that right now.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so at this point, I don't see myself maybe making it as much of an emphasis, but it's definitely going to continue to be part of my game. I do think I'll probably have a lot of these second-year guys, back on my teams this year. I'm planning anyway, so we'll see. But yeah, never did I expect to do that with any one team. It just happened.
You look at this. I mean, the first 3 guys you picked. Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, and Brian Thomas. I mean, these are all like first and second round picks next year. You know what I mean? Like, you got to pay a premium to get them.
I think I got Thomas in the 7th. I think I got Bowers in the 6th. I got Neighbors in the 3rd. I'll tell you, if Jahmyr Gibbs hadn't fallen to me in the 2nd, I might have taken Marvin Harrison there. If I'm being, and that obviously things would have went very differently for me, if that would have happened. But just fell that way for me.
Well, speaking of next year, Gary, I look at San Francisco, who did not make the playoffs this year. I'm not ready to put the sinking ship label on that team. They're going to have Purdy next year. They're going to have Brandon Ayuk coming back off the ACL. Kittle's going to be there. Samuel's going to be there. Juwan Jennings, Pearsall, all these guys. Or are they? When you look at that Niners team, they've already paid a lot of money to Ayuk, to McCaffrey, to Trent Williams, to Bosa. They have an expensive squad. They're very top heavy. And they're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. They have the Pearsall rookie contract working with. Okay, great. But when it comes to like Samuel and when it comes to Juwan Jennings, I don't know if those guys are going to be around next year. When you think about Ricky Pearsall, year 2, hopefully he doesn't come into the year, recovering from a gunshot wound or anything like that. But what do you think his role is going to be in 2025 for the Niners? And I guess when you answer this, I'm going to kind of get an inkling into how you think this Niners passing game is going to shake up for next year too.
Yeah, well, I think both Kittle and Debo have another year left on their deal.
Yes.
So I think they're all going to be there, and unless there's trade demands or whatever. I have to think that Pearsall is going to be a material part of what they do when you consider that he was a first-round pick this year, and you just see what he's capable of. I mean, what did he just do this past week? Like 28 fantasy points or something here in week 17. But I don't know how much his injury, his gunshot wound affected him after he came back. I mean, he seemed like he was good. He had a couple of good games, but I think he's probably going to disappear in a lot of games, just like he did this year when you've got that many guys, to throw to. He'll definitely be a best ball target for me at the right price next year. But I don't know that I'll have him on a lot of my redraft teams just because of everything you just said.
And I think about like if Samuel is back, I wonder, I guess you could make the same argument with Kittle, although he was pretty integral every single week this year, something he hasn't always been. He's been kind of boom or bust from week to week a lot of the time. But if Ayuk is coming back and Jennings is healthy and Samuel's healthy and Kittle's healthy and McCaffrey is healthy, I wonder if that's going to drill down, not necessarily McCaffrey, but like some of these other guys, if they're going to move down in drafts because people don't know exactly how they're going to be deployed, and people don't know what kind of target share these guys are going to get in a week in and week out basis, because not everybody's been healthy. Think about everybody who stepped up when McCaffrey got hurt, when Ayuk got hurt, when you think about Jennings and then Pearsall at the end of the season. Like, we've never seen this whole group healthy before.
Right.
And that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out next year.
If he falls far enough, Balky, always kind of have that idea of where you're willing to take somebody, at the end of the day. So kind of like the ambiguous backfield concept with running backs, when you've got that many wide receivers, I guess at the end of the day, if he falls far enough, it's worth a dart throw. But until things clear up a little bit more there, and I don't know if they will, in the off season or not, I would see him more as a best ball play, because I think he's going to have those spike weeks. He's going to have those occasional big weeks depending on how the offense decides to play it.
Hashtag better in best ball. I agree with you there. The Jets backfield was an interesting one this year. Now the Jets offense, we saw flashes, man. We saw some pretty good stuff from Devontae Adams. We saw some really good stuff from Garrett Wilson. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers had a resurgence for a few games this year as well. Breece Hall, for the most part, was mostly underwhelming. And some of that was the offense. Some of that was Braylon Allen stepping up. Some of that was Isaiah Davis stepping up. Allen and Davis were 2 rookies this year. The Jets invested into into 2 different players at that position in 2024 in the draft. What does that say about Breece Hall? What does that say about the future of the Jets backfield? And what does it say specifically about 2025 and how we're sort of handling this backfield? I think some of it depends upon who the quarterback is, But I think Breece Hall, who is arguably, I should say arguably, in some drafts he went as the 101. This guy could have a precipitous fall in FFPC ADP.
Yeah. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen next year. But you know what I thought about was, who's the coaching staff going to be?
Yeah.
What's it going to settle in there? If you do get a head coach and or an offensive coordinator in there who emphasizes one running back, kind of like McVay does, in LA, I still think it's Breece Hall. I think it really depends on who comes in there and, determines how they want to run that backfield. But if they get somebody who's going to end up doing similar to what they did here, like over the second half of the year, like you said, all three of those guys, Allen and Davis both, I think made a case to be part of a committee. So a lot of it, I think, is going to depend on, the buzz and the beat writers and everything you hear in the summer and in training camp, leading up to next year. And you're right. Right now, I think it seems like Breece Hall. I've listened to a couple of dynasty startup mock draft podcasts and things just to kind of get a sense of where guys are going. And I think Breece Hall went like middle to late second round in one that I listened to. And so, that would kind of feel right to me that, somebody's going to grab him in the second round right now. But, again, I think it just depends on how things play out here, as we get into the summer and we find out who the head coach is and who the offensive coordinator ends up being.
Yeah. And the quarterback. And we'll see what, that's going to be equally important as well. I'd like to say that's probably not going to be Aaron Rodgers, but at the same time, I don't know who out there is better. And I know Woody Johnson still seems like he feels like he can win every single year. So I don't know. Say what it's like. I always bring this up, the old monologue, the opening statement from Kevin Bacon in A Few Good Men in the Trial, where he said, Lieutenant Caffey is going to try to do a little magic trick. He's going to do some razzle dazzle, and he won't have any evidence, mind you, but it will be entertaining. And the Jets, they may not have a clue, but it will be entertaining for sure in this offseason to see.
One of my favorite movies, by the way. My wife sees me watching it all the time.
If I'm flipping and it's on TNT or something, boom, I set the remote down. I'm locked in for the remainder of the program.
A Few Good Men and Hoosiers. I'm not passing either of those movies.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
Anything that Bruckheimer and Simpson did in the 90s with like The Rock or Con Air or any of those films too. Like I'm dialed in on that. I love those. I love those flicks. There was a narrative in the NFL draft, after the NFL draft this past year, about Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey, I think people were excited about before the draft, and then he gets picked, and he's not. I can't remember what receiver he was off the board, fourth maybe in the draft, fifth. I don't know, but he goes to the Chargers, and he goes to a team that just hired Jim Harbaugh, a guy who loves running the ball and defense, right? And McConkey goes there as kind of like maybe he's the number one, but he doesn't have the prototypical size as like a outside alpha type receiver, right? And then what happens? A little bit of a slow start, but then towards the end of the season, especially in week 17, this dude hit his stride and he looked uncoverable. Now that we know all those factors that were working against him this past season, the offense, the size, the team he was on, the fact that he was, semi-pedigreed, I guess, we kind of got to throw those out the window given all the numbers he put up this year. How do you handle McConkey next season? Are you nervous about him going too high where you're like, I'm not interested in him at that price? How would you be handling McConkey?
Yeah, I'm well, first of all, assuming nothing changes with respect to free agency and the draft, obviously, just to put that caveat in there, could certainly change things. But assuming things stay status quo, like my gut reaction is high-end RB1, low-end RB2, high-end wide receiver 1, low-end wide receiver 2. And that might not be high enough. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty high on him, obviously. I love the guy. He reminds me a lot of guys like Wes Welker and Julian Edelman,
Oh,
who
sure. Yeah.
were impossible to cover. Got, 8+ targets a game, clearly the number one. I mean, certainly not a high-end number one like a Chase or a Jefferson, but, a mid-tier wide, number one on his team. The only thing that I'm worried about right now is he's already showing that he's hurt all the time. I mean, the last several weeks of the year, because I had him on one of my Fantasy Pros teams, made the sprint as well. I had 2 main event teams and 1 Fantasy Pros, and we had McConkey on the Fantasy Pros team. And just not knowing, when there'd be a Thursday night game and we'd have somebody playing on Thursday, but McConkey wasn't going till Sunday, and we didn't know yet if McConkey was going to play. So do we play the guy on Thursday night? I mean, it drove us crazy. And in the end, he started to have a pattern where he always played, for the most part. But I mean, he's in his first year, and the guy seems to be banged up every week. He was held out for a couple days this week, but before I think he went back to practice like yesterday or today. So that's my only worry about him is this a pattern, or is this just a fluky first year? But I'm not going to let that affect me next year. I mean, I can see myself taking him in the second round. I really can.
The other thing, you bring up the injury aspect, he's a West Coast guy, and that means a lot of 4 o'clock and 4:25 games, which can be maddening too. I was way off. He was the 9th receiver drafted this year, going at the end of the second round.
I thought it was later.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and you think about the guys that all went in front of him, you could make the case that he would be the 3rd second-year receiver drafted next year behind Neighbors and Thomas. I mean, for sure ahead of Harrison and Odunze. Worthy, I mean, I don't know. I think it kind of depends upon personal taste with Worthy, the way he's coming on. And speaking of Worthy, this Chiefs offense, they've shuffled through so many receivers this year. Hollywood Brown, he was signed, then he was out, now he's back in. They went out and got DeAndre Hopkins. Xavier Worthy took a step forward, towards the end of the season. Justin Watson has been doing enough to gum up the works, the perfect guy to never be anything good enough to start, but the perfect guy to screw over whoever you did start for Kansas City as well. Now, Hopkins could move on, and Hollywood Brown, we'll see. I mean, I don't even know. I don't think he's under contract next year either, so I don't know what's going to happen there. But the one guy we know will be at receiver for Kansas City next year is Xavier Worthy. When you talk about the Chiefs passing offense this year, next year, I beg your pardon, is Worthy going to be the number one receiver? They're going to have Rashee Rice coming off an ACL tear as well. And obviously he's going to factor in a lot of moving parts in this Kansas City passing game.
Yeah. I think they want it to be Rice. And I think he hurt his knee in like week 4 this year.
It was early, yeah.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think it probably lends itself to a fairly high likelihood that he'll be ready at the beginning of the season. But, I mean, I haven't heard one way or the other. But he seems to be the guy that fits that offense. And he seems to be the guy that Mahomes, dials in on. So, I think I would bet that it's going to be Rice, and that's who I'll probably be drafting, depending, again, on what the reports are. I think he might also face a short suspension as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
There was that assault or something issue in the spring that got dropped from a legal perspective, but the NFL was supposedly still going to discipline him about it or something. So I don't know where that's at either. But if it's not him or when he's not ready, I don't see anything different next year than this year. Worthy wasn't capable of stepping up and like being that true number one receiver. So for me, it's Rice. And like you said, I doubt Hopkins is back. I mean, maybe if he has a great postseason, they'll consider bringing him back if he'll come back for the right price. Marquise Brown, I believe that was a 1-year deal. I don't know that for an absolute fact. And then who knows? They may draft somebody in the draft again, at the end of the day, or bring somebody in free agency as well. So, but if you ask me for my best guess, I would say Rice. But I wanted to ask you, just jumping back real quick, where would you take McConkey?
Oh, boy. I don't think I would take him in the first 2 rounds. I would start considering him in the late 3rd. I here's the thing. I have a feeling tight ends are going to fall in the FFPC next year, given how many kind of whiffs there were with the top 5 or 6 this year, and people investing a high price, and that's going to affect. That's going to have receivers push up. It's going to have running backs push up, and I think with the cover 2 that we're seeing the last couple of years, I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on running back next year as well. So that could move him down. I think round 3, I start thinking about it, depending upon who I took in the first 2 rounds. Round 4, I mean, it's hard to argue with what he did.
No brainer for me in round 3, and yeah, I mean, it'll be so interesting to see how the first couple of drafts go. As the season gets started.
Gary, Barney Newkirk, our good buddy, noticed the Ohio State Buckeye logo on your zip. Are you from Ohio?
I am sitting right almost in the middle of Columbus, Ohio. I'm in a suburb called Westerville. Yep.
There you go. And you got to witness. And now, are you Ohio State grad or just a fan?
I am. Yeah, I'm an alum.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
So that had to be quite the treat on New Year's afternoon, watching your Buckeyes take it to Oregon.
I still can't believe it, honestly. I mean, it was just an absolute beatdown. It was impressive. And again, I don't know. This whole seeding process just blows my mind. I mean, you've got the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, and the 8 in the set. I mean, it's like, that's not seeding. I mean, anyway, my wife and I were having that conversation the other day, but yeah, I'm thrilled. I've got a few buddies that, my best friends are all Ohio State fans. And we have a thread going during every game, and like nobody knew what to say. I mean, it was crazy.
Can you give us the professional skinny on Travian Henderson or Emeka Egbuka for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I really can't. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm an Ohio State fan, but I'm not as dedicated to following the team as my buddies are. I mean, they're into the recruiting, and the whole thing. I think Egbuka is going to be a very effective wide receiver. I think he's probably being muted, by what's happening, from the freshmen.
Which we got to wait 2 more years. We can't draft him in rookie drafts or another 2. We can't draft him in any drafts until 2027 or whatever it is.
Where would he go? Where would he go this year?
Yeah.
If
we were talking, I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but if Jeremiah Smith was somehow draft eligible this year, number 1, he'd be a slam dunk first round NFL first round pick because of his age. So you could lock him up, for maybe 3 contracts if he ends up panning out. And then for rookie drafts, I mean, you're talking about, the 101 or the 102 behind Ashton Genty, or, he's right up there. And for redraft, I don't know. I think that there will be people who drafted. Now, I'm not saying this is a fair comparison, but there are going to be people who are upset about drafting Marvin Harrison in the 2nd round this year. And they're going to see another Ohio State receiver and like, oh, I'm out on this guy. I got burned by Harrison last year. Again, I'm not saying that's correct. It's definitely not good process, but people will think that way. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's fun to think about, but I also hate thinking about it because I really want to get this guy in the NFL, and we got to wait.
For sure.
So. And I'm in Wisconsin, so I'm a Badgers guy. Yeah. And now I got to watch Jeremiah Smith rip up the Badgers next year too. So it's
crazy.
Not going to be fun. Getting back to we're talking about the young guys here. Getting back to pro football, let's talk about some cliff guys for 2025. I'm not saying either of these guys fall off the cliff next year, Gary. But of Travis Kelce and Cooper Kupp, who do you think is more likely to fall off the proverbial cliff?
Yeah. And I'm with you, by the way. I truly don't think either of them is going to have that, meteoric fall off the cliff and be done. But when I think about what has happened to Kupp the last 3 weeks, he's had 3 targets each of the last 3 weeks. I'm wondering, like, if there's an injury situation that they're not talking about. I totally get that Puka Nacua is the number 1 guy there now, but for Kupp to be that uninvolved over the last 3 weeks of the year, and I'll be interested to see what happens, in the playoffs. But I have to say Kupp. I mean, I know Kelce kind of took a step back. He went from being the number 1 tight end 2 of the last 3 years. He fell to 5. this year. I could see Kelsey, falling a few more, assuming he doesn't retire, by the way. I guess there's always the possibility. I think there's some rumblings that he might retire. But, I think Kelsey falls off a little bit. But I think between the two of them, I think the one that falls off more is probably Kupp at this point. And if he goes into the year 100% healthy, I think you'd almost need a Nakua injury for Kupp to, really be relevant at that point, based on what we've seen the last 3 weeks.
I think that the issue to me is, what would the Rams offense look like if Nakua wasn't there? Would Kupp still be crushing it with 14 targets a game? And it's so difficult to pick through that when you have Puka Nakua, who is playing the wide receiver position as good as anybody, both at the NFL level and fantasy football right now. And it's really tough to make heads or tails out of that. In regards to Kelsey, I've just always viewed him as one of those like Jason Witten old man game type tight ends.
Catch the ball and fall down.
Yeah, like just catch the ball, and
right.
that's the thing. It's just like he's so good at getting open. He's been in the league long enough where he knows all the nuances of zone coverage. He has a quarterback that he's like, zeroed in on. They have this great connection. Yeah. And I think Matt Kelly from Player Profiler was saying like his season, his 2024 season, he didn't call it a cliff season. He called it a cliffy season. It felt cliffy, but it wasn't to him. But now next year, I don't know. I have him in this Dynasty League, and I really don't want to trade him. I think I just want to be holding the bag on Travis Kelce. And when he does fall off the cliff, I'll take the L then. But I feel like one more season, 2 more. I don't know, with a guy like that. It's so difficult to predict.
Yeah.
Week 17, let's look back on it. Now that the fantasy season, the regular, NFL season, fantasy season is behind us here. What was the biggest surprise to you? What caught you off guard? What was the biggest shock to you of everything that you witnessed in week 17, Gary?
The lack of offense and fantasy scoring in the Seahawks Bears game on Thursday night. I mean,
yeah, that was rough.
Oh my God. So, when you asked me that question, that, came to mind, but like, I wanted to go back and really see how bad was it really, did I remember it the right way? 2 Bears had a little over 12 points. Swift and DJ Moore had a little over 12 points. They were the highest fantasy scorers across both teams. The highest scoring Seahawk didn't hit 10. Neither of the quarterbacks were over 10 or 12 points on either side.
Right.
There were no touchdowns. The reason why that hit me right away was because I needed a big game from Zach Charbonnet. So I had Charbonnet as one of my 2 running backs along with Gibbs on the team we were talking about earlier. And, it was Thursday night. I thought, let's get off to a great start. Let me get 20 plus from Charbonnet. And that was why it stuck out. But that was a huge surprise to me.
What do you make of the Bears are going to have a new coach next year, but Caleb Williams is going to be there. Odunze is going to be there. DJ Moore is going to be there. Probably Cole Kmet. Keenan Allen, I don't know. But what do you make of the Bears offense next year? They got to take some kind of step forward, right? Or don't they?
Yeah, no, I think they're going to when you've got Caleb Williams, I think you've got to continue to give him opportunity. He flashed at times this year. I think he looked great at times this year. Some of the things, the clock management, some of the things that we saw too were horrible. But I think step forward. I'm going to stay positive, and I think the coach is going to have a lot to do with it. And I love Odunze. Especially if Allen's not there anymore. Yeah. I think Odunze may be undervalued next year just because he didn't have the kind of season that some of the other rookies that we were talking about earlier had.
I think that what I saw from Odunze in the first half of the year, and yeah, I guess the second half I saw some flashes too. You could tell like there were some moments, and you could tell that the talent at the quarterback position and his talent, this is going to be a thing in fantasy. Will it translate into victories for the Bears? That I don't know, but for fantasy, I definitely see something there.
I think so.
Going forward.
Agreed. By the way,
go ahead.
By the way, honorable mention to T. Higgins. I would have thought it would have been Chase that would have had the the monster, league winning, main event winning game. And I think one of the guys in the top 3, it might have been the top guy, I'd have to go back and look, had Burrow, Higgins, and Chase, had the triple stack, and got like 100 some odd points, a little over 100 points from all 3 of those guys combined.
I mean, that Bengals offense. Are you a Bengals guy? You're a Bengals guy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another offense next year and it sounds like you can probably speak to this better than I could. Somebody who covers the Bengals said that Joe Burrow is very calculated when he speaks to the media, and he really kind of forcefully said he was going to do whatever it takes to make sure T. Higgins is a Bengal in 2025 and beyond. Is that real? Are Higgins and Chase going to be back together next year? I'm kind of hoping so for fantasy, and Chase Brown too. Give me more of that Bengals offense. And quite frankly, Gary, I know you're a Bengals guy. I hope that the defense does not improve, because that offense was electric this past year. They're like the Lions of the AFC. It was fantastic.
Yeah. So if you would have asked me 3-4 weeks ago what I thought the chances were that Higgins would be back, I would have said 0. I would have said 0. But he fired David Mulligetta, his agent. And that's the agent that Jesse Bates had. He's the agent that tends, from what I understand, to try to get the single biggest deal for every one of his players. I think he had everything to do with why Jesse Bates left. And I think if he would have continued to be Higgins' agent, I think it would have been a 0% chance that Higgins would have been back. I think Higgins got rid of him because he wanted to at least leave the possibility open that he could come back. So I think the 0% for me maybe goes up to 20 or 25, nothing, no slam dunk or anything, but I think it's possible now.
A guy I rostered on several of my dynasty leagues in anticipation of Higgins potentially leaving is Jermaine Burton. He's in the news now. And from what I'm seeing, this is not good, that he was at a casino late at night. I don't know how reputable that is, the stuff I saw on X. But I do know that Zach Taylor said it's coach's decision that he's not making the flight to play in the game on Saturday. So now should I be souring on Burton here as well?
I wouldn't, from a dynasty perspective. He also was a healthy scratch for a game earlier this year because he was late for a meeting, or he didn't show up to a walkthrough or something. He fell to the 3rd round because of immaturity issues. That was, everybody was shocked that he was there, and the Bengals seemed to think it wasn't going to be an issue. And sure enough, it's an issue. So, I guess it's possible the guy will mature and he'll grow up a little bit and learn from these mistakes. I wouldn't sour on him from a dynasty perspective.
Okay. Good.
But it's very, it's concerning that he's doing. I mean, come on, man, you're an NFL wide receiver, come on.
Who has the bigger 2025 season, Jermaine Burton or Jalen McMillan in Tampa?
Oh, McMillan, hands down. I love McMillan. Absolutely love him. And I think what he's been doing the last few weeks is not a fluke. Not a fluke at all.
Evans is going to be back there, but I think Godwin's a free agent, and he's obviously coming off that torn ACL. But McMillan was another guy I tried to get in a few dynasty leagues. It just in anticipation, because Baker Mayfield looked unbelievable down the stretch here, and I think he can continue that next year. And McMillan would be a big beneficiary of that.
Absolutely,
if that does happen.
Absolutely.
McMillan had a weird season where I know a lot of best ball people took him early. And we're disappointed after he scores a touchdown in week 1 and then basically does nothing until the very end of the season, last couple of weeks of the season. He crushes it and he helps some people. I don't know if that's a player that you wish you would add more of, given that his best weeks of the season were the very end of the season, something that JJ Zachariason always talks about. But is there a player that you were close to drafting a lot more of, but for whatever reason you didn't? And then a player that you did have on a decent number of your teams that you wish you would have completely stayed away from?
Yeah, you already mentioned him. And as a Bengals fan, I'm embarrassed to say what I'm about to say, but I totally whiffed on Chase Brown. I faded Chase Brown. And the reason why I did was because I planted my flag on Zach Moss. I thought going into the year, knowing the Bengals coaching staff, knowing the kind of back Moss was, I thought he would be the goal line back. I thought he would be the first two downs. He would be the early down back. I never thought the coaching staff would let Chase Brown be anything more than a third down back. I never thought they'd let him be a 3 down back like they have. And Balky, I couldn't have been more wrong about that. Total miss on my part. I had him on none of my 9 redraft leagues in the FFPC, and I only had him on a couple of my 30 best ball teams. So huge mistake, total miss on my part, and will not be making that mistake again next year.
Totally get it. However, Moss doesn't tear his ACL.
Right.
Now we might have a different conversation.
I will say I was right about the fact that Moss got the first chance to be the main back. I got that right. But just under the whole ambiguous backfield thought, I should have split it more. I shouldn't have put all my eggs in the Moss basket, and I should have split it more.
And I get that. I mean, I quite frankly, I should have split it more. I do have Chase Brown on a bunch of teams. I only have Zach Moss on like a couple. And I think when it comes down to it, Gary, I usually end up breaking ties in favor of the younger guy, because I always say this is a young man's game. And that's the way I ended up doing it. Now I don't know if Moss is going to be back in Cincinnati next year, but wouldn't it stand to reason that this backfield, even though Chase Brown has been awesome, would be another ambiguous backfield next year? Would they bring in somebody else to share the time with him?
I think Moss got a 2-year deal.
So he's going to be back. Okay.
Again, don't quote me on that. I'm doing that totally from memory, but I'm almost positive he got a 2-year deal. So I think they're just going to go right back into what they had. Now they may flip it. A little bit. Moss is not a bad. He's not bad at catching the ball, out of the backfield. So that'll be an interesting one. But I mean, Chase Brown, if it's a 1A 1B, then Chase Brown I think is definitely going to be the 1A.
Yeah, no question.
What he did this year. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with you on that. And by the way, you're right. Moss is under contract with the Bengals through 2025. So that'll be the backfield. I'm here for it. it. Yeah. So that's a player that. Chase Brown was a guy that you wish you would have gone with. Is there a guy that you really regret taking? Not in 1 or 2 spots, but in several spots this year.
Yeah. Now in past years, I would have been able to easily answer this question because I make mistakes all the time, and I made mistakes this year too. But nobody really stood out to me that was like a early round guy that I took a lot of. So I think I did well there this year. But on all 3 of my main event teams and on 2 of my 6 Fantasy Pros teams, I took Jonathan Brooks in either the 8th or 9th round. And again, it was under the thought that I was trying to do a better job of building a team for the second half of the year for the sprint. And obviously that didn't work out for me. He didn't get back near as early as I thought he would. There was early thought that he'd be ready to go by week 5, week 6. He ended up not getting back to I think week 10, maybe it was something like that. And then even then he never got more than 5 or 6 carries in the second game that he was back. And then I feel horrible for the guy. Then he tears his ACL again. So I did have a lot of shares of Jonathan Brooks and if I could do it over again, I wouldn't have wasted an 8th or a 9th round pick. It didn't kill me, obviously. Right. I had Jonathan Brooks on that main event team, as you pointed out. He was one of the rookies that I drafted, but I held on to him for the entire year. So he took up a bench spot, as well.
I think the thing with Brooks, and I had him on a few teams, I drafted him as my 3rd running back in a lot of spots, but part of the reason I was able to do that was because of the recovery from the ACL. Otherwise, that guy would have been, drafted in the top 15, top 20 probably this year.
Exactly.
For running backs, I'm saying.
Right. In best ball, I had one guy that I had a lot of shares of. Again, a rookie, and I drafted a ton of rookies in best ball. And the one that ended up being a mistake for how many times I took him was Adonai Mitchell. Oh yeah. He just he had a couple of games here and there, but at the end of the day, now again, I didn't have to waste high draft capital, obviously, to get him. But I had him on a lot of my teams, and if I could do it over again, certainly I would have faded him.
Yeah, Mitchell was again a great guy to get. Rookie, mystery box, big time speedster. You had a big arm and Anthony Richardson throwing to him. sometimes the best laid plans, they just, for whatever reason, they don't work out. And that was one of them that I wish I could have back. But I think that's the thing. We've been playing fantasy football for so long. We could probably do another hour of all the regrettable picks we've had over the last couple of years, of which there are many. Thankfully for you, you made enough really good ones to finish in 20th place of the FFPC main event. So I congratulate you on that. And congratulations on a great season, man. I wish you nothing but the best of luck, not only in the playoff challenge, if you're going to be a part of that this year, as well as 2025 drafts, which I know you'll be definitely knee deep into before we know it here. Gary, thank you so much for spending your Friday night with me, and we will do this again real soon. A happy new year to you, and go Buckeyes.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Balky. Great seeing you. Thanks for letting me do this again.
Absolutely. Always my pleasure, Gary. We'll do it again soon. Thanks, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That is Gary Kuhr, the 20th place finisher in the FFPC main event this year. A guy that definitely knows ball, and anytime we get a chance to talk with somebody who knows ball, we're going to bring him on this show. That is going to do it for our program tonight. I do want to thank Gary, the FFPC, and everybody who makes this show possible, including RotoViz. The one thing I'll mention is we are back on our normal Tuesday schedule, but not for long. We only have 2 episodes of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown left this season, and then we'll go to monthly starting in February. On Tuesday night, we're going to have the 2023-2024 FFPC Playoff Challenge $100,000 winner from last year, who also won an additional $160,000 with the FFPC last year, Cullen Hoffman, who is right here in Appleton, Wisconsin. He's going to join me on that show on Tuesday night. That's going to be a lot of fun and get you set for your world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge lineups. We'll have a lot of questions on how to build the lineup and who to focus in on that. If you want to get your teams, I would strongly suggest you do that right now. Go to myffpc.com. Myffpc.com is where to go. Sign up for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Again, the lineups lock at 1 o'clock on next Saturday this year, as opposed to 4:30, because we got 3 games that day. So you're not going to be able to spend your afternoon building lineups. You got to spend your morning building lineups that day. So get those entries in early. You can win up to $500,000 at the $200 entry level, or win $100,000 at the $35 entry level as well. The Week 18 Weekly Challenge is here, myffpc.com. We have 2 of them this week. Lineups lock at 4:30 tomorrow, Saturday, and then lineups lock again at 1 p.m. on Sunday. So make sure you're getting your teams in that. Again, for both the world-famous Playoff Challenge and the Weekly Challenge, 1 player per team. You can't double dip. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. So these teams literally take minutes to build, and you can build a bunch of them and win a lot of money, hopefully. $2,500 is how much you can win this weekend in Week 18 for as little as a $35 entry. And world famous playoff challenge up to $500,000 we'll give away as the grand prize again. In case you missed the Better Sports Network's high stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network, you can last night you could check it out on any of the Better Sports Network or FFPC socials. Bob Harris from Football Guys and SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio chopped it up with me for 2 full hours. A lot of good playoff challenge chatter in that. And then next Thursday, we're going to have on Steph Miller from Legendary Upside, who is going to, we're going to build a couple of world famous playoff challenge lineups on that show. That's going to be a lot of fun. 7 o'clock on the FFPC and the Better Sports Network socials. The Friday night show is still coming up in a little over an hour. Farrell Elliott, live from Las Vegas, Nevada, and me will be joined by the 2024 FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship $1 million winner, Mike Melberg, who lives in, you guessed it, Appleton, Wisconsin, putting Appleton back on the map. So good to have him. We're going to talk about how he built his team, and we're going to talk about the sweat for Week 17 for him as well. We'll get into some playoff challenge stuff on that episode tonight. That's right here, coming up in a little bit over an hour. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Certainly appreciate it. We will rejoin you on this program at 10 p.m. on Tuesday. Enjoy Week 18 and get those playoff challenge lineups in. Thanks so much for watching and listening, everybody. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.